Welcome to ECD 541 Assessment of Young Children. In this lesson, you will be learning about factors contributing to current practices in assessment. We must ensure that assessment information is accurate and trustworthy. We will look at reliability, validity, and fairness, and why we assess, what to assess, and when to assess. Let's jump right in. This presentation has two purposes: to review and highlight key points in this week's readings and videos, and to provide the 7 strategies of assessment for learning. What could you say about a child from looking at this picture? Well, one person might say that the child has very good motor skills. Another might say that he is showing off. A third, that he is demonstrating what he learned in gymnastics, while a fourth might say that he is imitating the breakdancing he saw on television. Who is right? Well, it could be any of these possibilities. There might be more than one that fits, or none of them. To make a determination as to which it is, we need to have more information about the context in which the behavior is occurring and more information about the child. Changing oil in your car makes sure it runs well, and that routine maintenance also can surface potential problems. Taking care of a cold early on prevents a minor health issue from becoming more serious. The same mindset can apply to teachers and their work with children. And just as mechanics and doctors need good information to make the right decisions, so do teachers. This leads us to the process of assessment. What is assessment? It refers to almost any form of measurement and appraisal of what children know and can do, including tests, observations, and interviews. It is a way to gather information about how a child or a group of children are doing in one or more areas of development or learning. Assessment also tells you, as the teacher, how well you are doing. This information may be obtained in different ways. One way is to systematically observe the child to see how he or she performs in certain situations. Another way is to have interviews with those who know the child well, to gather their impressions of the child in school as well as in other settings. Still another approach is to examine records that might still be available. This could include previous history in school settings or medical records. And finally, seeing how a child is able to perform on a particular task can provide helpful information. After the information is gathered, it is examined and organized for better understanding. This information then is available to be used to make data-driven decisions about the child's overall level of performance or to suggest ways to improve learning for that child. It also may tell you to try another approach to teaching. Now that we know what assessment is, we should talk a little about the reasons why children are assessed. We use assessments to monitor children's development and learning, guide classroom planning and decision making in order to help children learn, identify children who might benefit from special help, and report to and communicate with others. But let's start with the big picture. McAfee and Long present assessment as falling into 2 categories: assessment of learning and assessment for learning. Broadly speaking, assessment of learning also can be described as summative assessment. Assessment for learning can also generally be described as formative assessment. Summative assessments, or assessments of learning, are given periodically to determine at a particular point in time what students know and do not know. Many tend to think of summative assessments as involving standardized tests, such as state assessments. However, they also are an important part of district and classroom programs. Summative assessment at the district classroom level is an accountability measure that is generally used as part of the grading process. The list is long, but here are some examples of summative assessments: state assessments, district benchmarks, end of unit or chapter tests, end of term or semester exams, scores that are used for accountability of schools and of students, such as report card grades. While summative assessments of learning, have their purposes, there are several drawbacks. The key is to think of summative assessment as a means to gauge, at a particular point in time, student learning relative to content standards. Although the information that is gleaned from this type of assessment is important, it can only help in evaluating certain aspects of the learning process. Because they are spread out and occur after instruction, every few weeks, months, or even once a year, summative assessments are tools to help evaluate the effectiveness of programs, school improvement goals, alignment of curriculum, or student placement in specific programs. Summative assessments happen too far down the learning path to provide information at the classroom level and to make instructional adjustments and interventions during the learning process. It takes formative assessment to accomplish this. The goal of summative assessments is to make a judgment of student competency after an instructional phase is complete. Summative evaluations are used to determine if students have mastered specific competencies and to identify instructional areas that need additional attention. Formative assessments are ongoing assessments, reviews, and observations in a classroom. They should be considered part of the instructional process and used to improve instructional methods and student feedback throughout the teaching and learning process. For example, if a teacher observes that some students do not grasp a concept, he or she can design a review activity or use a different instructional strategy. The results of formative assessments are used to modify or validate instruction. Where all good formative assessment utilizes feedback to students as part of the growth process, assessment for learning puts a greater focus on the participatory role of the students in both the assessing and the learning. With this increased participation, students are more intrinsically motivated to learn. They feel empowered and in greater control of their lives. None of us like to feel lost or at the mercy of those with greater power around us. Therefore, just like teachers, students also need to know where they are going, where they are now, and how to close that gap. If that sounds familiar, it should. Where they are going are the objectives, goals, and learning targets. Where they are now is the assessments. And how to close the gap is the path to get to the objectives and goals. The first of McAfee's and Long's stated purposes for assessing is to monitor children's development and learning. All children grow and develop differently. We can never assume that just because a child is a certain age or has completed a certain level of schooling, that he or she has certain skills and capabilities. Furthermore, we want to see how children are growing, what they are learning. The authors point out 3 different reasons teachers monitor children's development and learning. 1, we assess in order to provide evidence of learning to themselves, parents, and the children. When we are immersed in learning with children, sometimes it can be a surprise to realize how much they have learned. Other times we are unaware that it is taking an especially long time for a particular child or group of children to master or progress in learning a skill or concept. Therefore, it is important to periodically step back and take a purposeful look at children's growth. For other reasons to be discussed shortly, it is important to chart this growth, to document it and use that documentation appropriately. Another reason teachers monitor children's development and learning is to guard against the assumption that just because something has been taught, everyone has learned it. Everyone learns at different rates, through different means, and at different times. While it may take one child a brief introduction to adding two numbers together using manipulatives, other students may need repeated exposure using different materials or even just a longer time to think about the steps involved to master the skill. Just because I've introduced taking 3 cubes for one number and 2 cubes for another number and then counting all the cubes at once doesn't mean that every child will understand that procedure. Furthermore, it doesn't mean that just because today I've modeled it with 3 and 2, that children will know that they can use that same procedure when using 4 cubes and 4 cubes the next day or a month later or 2 months later. We must be constantly assessing to watch for how children are growing with the skills and concepts that have been presented. So we also assess to make needed changes in response to what children have or have not learned. This guides our teaching. It creates a roadmap and takes us to McAfee's and Long's next reason for assessment, to guide classroom planning and decision making. On one side of learning, you have the standards and objectives, which we'll be talking about shortly. Those are your destinations. On the other side of learning, you have the current location of your students. In the classroom, you must know your students' current skills, capabilities, interests, learning needs, their current locations, in order to get them to the destinations, which are the standards and objectives. At times, this can be moment-to-moment assessment and decision-making, also known as monitoring and adjusting instruction as it is occurring. It could also be day-to-day observations or even more formal assessments. The key piece here is that there is constant interplay between the student and the teacher, with the destination always in sight of the goal. However, these descriptions make formative assessments sound as though teachers are the only ones determining how children progress along the path to their learning destinations. This is where Stiggins, Arter, Chapuis, and Chapuis' 7 strategy of assessments for learning steps in. There are times, though, when students can struggle, regardless of how motivated they are or how well students and teachers are working together with the 7 strategies above, modifying learning activities, or through other measures. For these reasons, assessments are also used to identify children who might benefit from special help. It is imperative to have documentation about a child's skills in order for them to receive any additional assistance. At times, screening assessments are completed with children to provide an early indication of special needs. Other times, students only receive special assistance after a classroom teacher thoroughly documents the students' learning and any struggles they may be having. There are times when individual children really stand out as needing assistance. However, there are also many times when individual children are overlooked because of their compliance and ability to go with the flow. Systematic assessment helps to ensure that these children are not lost in the larger group. A final purpose of assessment discussed by McAfee and Long is that assessment is used to report to and communicate with others. As we've just discussed, information should be shared with students to further guide their own learning. Information can be shared with parents or guardians to help them understand how their child is doing. Information can also be shared with school teams to communicate to others the assistance that children need, beyond that which the classroom teacher can provide. Information also can be used for program evaluation and for accountability purposes. Accountability refers to holding teachers and programs responsible for meeting a required level of performance. Accountability requirements often include what children should learn and be able to do. The area of accountability is increasingly becoming an important element in teachers' professional lives. Stiggins et al. Provide 7 strategies of assessment for learning to assist students and teachers along this path. Strategy 1. Provide a clear and understandable vision of the learning target or objective. We want to share student-friendly objectives or learning targets. Please see the article entitled Knowing Your Learning Target. It describes why we want to have learning targets that are in student-friendly terms. A learning target explains what to learn, how deeply to learn it, and exactly how to demonstrate the student's new learning. This doesn't necessarily mean that you will always tell the children exactly what they're going to do, observe, or learn. For direct instruction lessons, you will be explicit and overt about what the students will be learning. For other types of lessons, for example, inquiry, you will let the students discover what they are learning. Strategy 2. Use examples and models of strong and weak work. At times, it would be appropriate to use anonymous work of children. However, with very young children, preschool and younger, I would advocate only using examples of quality work. Additionally, as skill levels are so largely variable at young ages, it is helpful to show a range of quality work. A particularly good way of demonstrating strong and weak work is through the teacher's direct modeling of his or her own work. For example, in my classroom's writing workshop, I show my young beginning writers how I can go back and edit my story by adding more details to my picture story, writing a few more labels, and adding to my sentence. All the while, I am thinking out loud so that the students get an idea of the thought processes that go into creating a quality story. Strategy 3. Offer regularly descriptive feedback. Simply stating "good job" or "I really like the way you" is not descriptive feedback. Descriptive feedback is most helpful when it tells a student what they are doing well and then provides input on the next step. This strategy helps with growth mindset. Children enjoy knowing how to get to the next level. Discussing those next steps together gives children a chance to co-create their learning pathways. For example, instead of saying "you are so smart," which is a fixed mindset, try saying "you discovered the way to solve that math problem correctly." That shows a growth mindset. Strategy 4. Teach students to self-assess and set goals. This strategy can be used in tandem with offering descriptive feedback. While you offer descriptive feedback, work with the children to have them also self-assess how they are doing and what needs to be done next. Student-created portfolios are an excellent example of this strategy. In my own classroom, I had pre-made graphs where the students graphed their own progress. This is motivating and lets the students know exactly where they are. Strategy 5. Design lessons to focus on one aspect of quality at a time. Oftentimes, the task at hand can appear overwhelming. Focusing on one aspect at a time makes the learning and teaching more manageable for both teachers and learners. For example, when assessing a child's reading skills, focus on what strategy the child uses for an unknown word. Provide descriptive feedback on that skill. Have a tight focus in order to help the students learn. Strategy 6. Teach students focused revision. This relates back to the idea of providing examples and models of strong and weak work, which was strategy 2. However, with this strategy, you are actively modeling and showing how revisions would make that product an even higher quality. Again, with young students, teacher modeling is one of the most effective ways to improve student work. I know that my young students take an inordinate amount of pride, interest, and motivation in working with me to improve my stories in Writer's Workshop, or helping me to revise how I solved a math problem and to solve it more efficiently. Strategy 7. Engage students in self-reflection and let them keep track of and share their learning. One of the most important parts of assessment and lesson planning is self-reflection. This is the key to academic achievement. The youngest of children can reflect on what they are learning and share. One way to do this is to ask the students to reflect on their own learning with, "I got it," "I need a little support," "I don't understand this." They can do this with thumbs up or down, a fist to 5, etc. As you can tell, these 7 strategies actively involve and engage the students in assessing their own learning experiences. Assessing becomes something not done to the students, but rather something done with the students. To summarize, assessment of learning is that endpoint, summative assessment of skills. Assessment for learning is formative assessment that allows teachers and students to collaboratively guide that student's learning forward to higher and higher levels of achievement. But what do I assess? To some degree, we've already answered that question. It's the "where am I going" question students need to have answered before they begin their assessments for learning. It's that destination. Typically, we want to gather information about whether an individual child has been able to meet a particular goal or the child's progress towards meeting that goal. We also might want to know about how well children are doing developmentally or in terms of the requirements of the program they are in. As an example, the Head Start Child Outcomes Framework provides a way for Head Start programs to evaluate children's progress and accomplishments. It also helps programs in their efforts to analyze and use data on child outcomes in program self-assessment and continuous improvement. These outcome frameworks are composed of 8 general domains and include 100 examples of specific indicators of children's skills, abilities, knowledge, and behaviors. In addition to the Head Start examples, schools and districts also may be interested in knowing how well young children are progressing in meeting state early learning standards or the state standards. Using data collected through the child's day will enable groups to determine this. Furthermore, states and districts have published standards and objectives that each child in grades kindergarten through 3rd grade must master by the end of each academic year. For our early childhood program, you will be using the Arizona State Standards for kindergarten through 3rd grade and the Arizona Learning Standards for birth through pre-K. The Arizona State Standards were updated in 2016, so make sure you are using the most current version of the standards. Individual schools and districts often have predetermined assessments, both formative and summative, that must be completed throughout the year that correspond to these standards. Of course, individual classroom teachers and students will also be monitoring through classroom assessments children's growth and progress towards achieving these goals. Learning outcomes describe the essential learning that children will know and be able to perform by the end of your program. When progress is being assessed, it is essential to break down broad outcomes into smaller components or chunking the lesson so that it is easier to determine if the skill has been achieved. You do this when teaching and lesson planning as well. Good progress monitoring will identify the sequence of developmental skills so that you can more explicitly guide the young child's learning. When you know where in a particular development sequence a child is at, you will be better able to offer experiences that most closely match the child's level in their zone of proximal development. while providing the stepping stones needed to advance to higher levels of understanding and competence. So, knowledge and skills will progress from very basic to more challenging, a task analysis. And children will build knowledge and skills based on what they have already learned. This implies that you should have a good understanding of the development sequence of the skills you will be working on. Luckily, there is much that has been done in this area, and many resources are available to help you via the internet and numerous print materials. When do I assess? Again, the answer to that question has been embedded in all of the previous discussion. Briefly stated, you assess all the time. Frequently, screening assessments are completed before the school year even begins. This is especially true in formal screening assessments for pre-kindergarten programs. But it is also part of the enrollment process as school records are transferred and self-reporting forms are filled out by parents and children. Teachers and students are constantly assessing for learning throughout the day and more systematically at predetermined times to help guide instruction and learning. Summative assessments may also be completed at the end of units or concentrated areas of study to check for student learning and growth and to make sure that students are ready to move on to other areas of study. Other assessing may also occur as needed in order to obtain additional information about a problem or concern. This can be used to guide further learning or to help document issues, to report to others in order to receive special help for a struggling student. How do we assess small children? So how do we assess them? Well, anyone who has spent much time with young children will know that typical evaluation and testing methods are not very effective. Young children can tire easily, do not have the attention span of older children, and may be uncomfortable with unfamiliar adults. Although they may be able to perform a task, how they feel at a particular point in time will have major implications for whether they will actually demonstrate their ability. They may refuse because the setting is uncomfortable or new to them, or because another activity, object, or person holds greater interest. It is for these reasons that one-time testing is not recommended. As a result, authentic assessment is a preferred method for gathering information about the young child. The authentic assessment process occurs in the context of familiar tasks and routines and incorporates the assistance of family members and caregivers who are familiar with the child and have seen what the child is able to do in everyday situations. Authentic assessment will permit you to gather information using a variety of techniques. It is also known as performance assessment, alternative assessment, or direct assessment. All three labels imply that the assessment process provides an alternative to traditional assessment by focusing more directly on a child's performance of a real-life task. It is important that we frame assessment differently than traditional definitions. We should not think about assessment as a separate event. Rather, we should constantly be gathering and documenting information about the child throughout the day, through our observations, our conversations with those in regular contact with the child, as well as through the child's products. So, we are looking at multiple pieces of information collected in numerous ways from multiple sources that can be both people and activities. This type of information will provide a more thorough picture of the child in a real-life setting and help you plan. Later in the course, you will learn about the nuts and bolts of assessment. You will see that there are many ways to gather information, and you will begin to build your toolbox of techniques to help you better understand and guide the learning of the young children you work with. As you proceed through the course, keep in mind that assessment is a continuous process. It is meant to help you and others optimize the instructional process, and it should always be linked to standards and learning.